start with you, Salome. Given that you've embraced underrepresented communities through your work for years, what was the impetus for this exploration of disability representation in cinema history?
Um, yeah, I had made a series of films with Susan Nussbaum in the early 2000s. She was the facilitator of a group of girls with disabilities called the Empowered Fifis of Access Living. And, that as girls with disabilities, they were restricted from a lot of resources that other kids in school would ordinarily receive, the arts, sex ed, all things like that. So Susan wanted to provide opportunities for them in the workshop, and she got a grant, and we did this series of movies. It started with this one, Beyond Disability, the Fifi stories, was so successful that we did some more. And so Susan and I built this really long, deep relationship around movie making and representation. And when she had been initially injured in her early 20s and became disabled, she knew nothing about disability except what she had learned from the movies. Yeah, she had this urgent need to deconstruct those images that she saw were so false and misleading and ultimately destructive. So that was it. It just started the conversation. And then when we finished the Fifi movies, we invited Carrie Sandal and Aly Patsavas to join us in this, what turned out to be years and years of research. It was crazy, but yeah, we thought we were just gonna finish something in the next couple, 3 years, and it didn't work out that way.
All right. Aly, one of the more interesting expressions that you make in the film is the difference between how blind women are treated in the media, almost a sexuality and their vulnerability, and blind white men reclaiming their masculinity from their vulnerability. What does this express about the creators of such story situations, besides sounding as if they're all mostly male?
Women directors and writers are not immune to sexism and the sort of influences of patriarchy either. So I don't want to give it all on, give like the sort of structural responsibility only on men. But of course, the patriarchy is there for a reason. But stories like the sort of case study that we do in the film around blindness is really just that. It's a particularly underscored case study, I think, because, blindness, as we talk about, is sort of like seen as a kind of ultimate sense of vulnerability. And so there's this ease with which storytellers are like, oh, blindness must be vulnerable. Let's accentuate that. Like, it's like this sort of weird shorthand of like sloppy metaphor writing, I think, that happens in filmmaking, and it happens around lots of different impairments, right? It's not just blindness, and it's not just stories about white women, particularly the vulnerability of white women, and then the sort of anxiety around white masculinity that make these stories I think particularly attractive to filmmakers and to audiences, right? Right, because if the question is why, right? Because patriarchy, because sexism, because there's a kind of like cultural cachet in reproducing and reclaiming this kind of masculinity, or underscoring like the need to save white women from their own vulnerability.
I think the other thing, the thing about blindness that's such a convenient trope is it doesn't necessarily interfere with somebody's ability to be beautiful in the really conventional way. So so we have all these not only vulnerable women, but very beautiful.
Well, Salome, since you are also an installation artist, how did that play into the design of the documentary and in the search for the unique clips from the films that you use as examples?
Well, that's such a great question, because, and Aly knows this well, because She and I were at this afternoon long writing session one day, and we were dreaming up all these settings where we could do the interviews, in a bathtub. We would have our interviewee in a bathtub, or, like really kind of wacky, far out, fun things. I was very driven to create some kind of an environment for the interviewees. And it turned out that, at first we had thought about using clips, but we thought it would be prohibitive financially. But then we found this amazing attorney that argued fair use for us. And so we were able to create the environment, like in post. And the really cool thing about it is we were able in each case to find clips that really went into dialogue with what the interviewee was saying, so that it was totally justified. The use of the clips became totally justified.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2022.